You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? What's up? Okay, today I'm joined by Shaylyn Forte, a licensed professional counselor in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She has a bachelor's degree in rehabilitation and human services and a master's degree in counselor education, both from the Pennsylvania State University. Shaylyn's clinical experience includes working in both inpatient and outpatient settings with clients who have anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, ADHD, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, substance use disorders, and eating disorders. Since becoming licensed as a professional counselor in 2017, she has dedicated her practice to helping clients learn how to better manage their anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, and feelings related to life transitions. She has a particular affinity for working with adults in their 20s and 30s as they navigate the many life transitions that occur during this time period. So today's conversation with Shaylyn is more or less Therapy 101. What is it? Who is it for? How will you benefit from it? What you should look for in a therapist. We talk about making therapy more affordable and how you can do that. Shaylyn is breaking it all down for us. She also shares a lot about her own experience in high school of working with a therapist who is these days more of a mentor, but how impactful that experience was. And this also leads to a discussion on therapy with teens and in schools. So we cover a lot, but I think that this is a really great episode of baseline information for anyone who's curious about therapy, who has been thinking about picking up the phone. Shaylyn has a lot of thoughts to offer us and a lot of information. How many different ways can I say that? So anyway, as always, stay tuned after for my final thoughts. Hey, Shaylyn, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, so I said to you off air, and I'm going to say it again, I really appreciate you taking the time to sort of humor me and all of my prep questions. You were so thoughtful. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I am glad to help however I can.
Right, so I guess I will jump right in with kind of a straightforward question, maybe put you on the spot a little bit. Do you believe that therapy is for everyone?
Yes, absolutely. Don't even need to think about it. I believe that therapy is for everyone. And I think you'll hear a lot of therapists say that as well. And people might not take us seriously because of that, because we're obviously biased. People might say, oh, you think therapy's for everyone so that, you can just have a bunch of clients available to you. That's not it at all. I think therapy is for everyone because we all have things that we need help working on. I mean, you just think about the problems that are universal to human beings, and it's stuff like wanting to be accepted and struggling with shame and guilt. And in this day and age, lots of anxiety and lots of depression and lots of social anxiety and isolation. And on top of that, at the bottom line, everyone goes through life transitions, and those can be really difficult to deal with as well. So, therapy is a great option for all of those things that I just mentioned. And I don't know a single person who hasn't been through at least one of those things.
Yeah, I think that hearing you talk, I mean, I couldn't agree more. But I think what happens is when, on one hand, labeling some of these difficulties, for me, actually helps me process it
what I'm going through. But I think sometimes for others, it makes it feel almost more, I want to say bigger than it is, but because it is big, but it makes it feel more, I don't know, maybe you have words for it that I don't, but almost like they have a bigger problem than just normal people going through things, and I think that tends to turn
Yeah.
people away a bit.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point that you make. And I'm glad that we're talking about it today because maybe we can clear this up for some people. Like, I think what really highlights what you're speaking to is I've had clients who, when it comes to journaling, which is one of those coping skills that a lot of therapists like, it's kind
Mm-hmm.
of cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. I have some clients who tell me I absolutely love journaling. It helps me, clear up what I'm thinking. It helps me realize when I'm being irrational. It helps me compartmentalize. And then I have some people who say I absolutely hate journaling. Putting words down on paper, writing it out makes it feel more real, and it already feels bad enough as it is in my head. I don't want to give words to it and solidify that. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what you're speaking to. Like sometimes saying it out loud or going to a therapist means that you're saying, yeah, this is real. We have to remember it's real even if you're not saying it out loud.
Yeah, I really like that because as you're talking, I'm realizing how I'd like to clarify what I said, and that is that I think that when you talk about what you're going through, when you talk about your feelings, your emotions, your transitions, you're sometimes straightforwardly and sometimes inadvertently really admitting that you need help. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that there's a great resistance to that, especially I'll be kind and say certain generations, certain cultures. He's in the next room, but I'm thinking a lot of my husband who just grew up somewhat in a different generation than I did, and he just doesn't. It's literally his words are, "It's not my thing," and I want to
Mm-hmm.
say, "But what's not your thing? Like helping yourself, So
Yeah.
I think that um, I don't know. I'm working towards, and maybe you have ideas on how we do this, but how do we change someone's mind? How do we show them the light without them actually ever stepping foot into a therapist's office?
Yeah, it's really hard. I think that we could start with resources. Like if, there's a loved one, maybe someone who's in your shoes who wants their husband to go to therapy or something like that. And, the husband says no, or whoever we're talking about says no. And the loved one is able to say, well, could you at least listen to this podcast and just hear a little bit about what therapy is like?
Mm,
Or um, there's a book out there called think it's called You Need to Talk to Someone, or I think You Need to Talk to Someone. Might want to.
Lori Gottlieb.
Yeah,
Maybe you should
yeah.
talk to someone.
Maybe you should
Yeah,
talk to someone
yeah, yeah.
exactly.
It's good.
And
It's
so
good.
that would be a great resource for
Yeah,
someone who's a little bit ambivalent about it. I really wish everyone would just kind of make a bargain with themselves and try it like for at least, I don't know, a month
yeah.
and see how it goes. I also wish that it was more normalized from an earlier age because I think part of the
Mm,
reason that I love being a therapist and I love being in therapy is because I went to therapy starting in middle school because the school therapist just had this group for friends to come, and it's like you could get out of gym class, you could get out of social studies, you and your
it's
friends could go
amazing.
sit with a therapist and you guys could all talk about the issues you were having within your friend group. And so it just was
Wow.
so normalized. um, I wish that they would do more of that, or I wish, like in health class, we're learning about a lot of things, but we don't really learn about mental health, and that's something that everyone's going to go through at some point or another.
That sounds pretty incredible. My quote unquote friend group in middle school definitely could have benefited from that greatly. I spent many a day slipping notes under lockers and crying myself to sleep over that drama. I mean, and I actually, now that you bring it up, I've absolutely blocked most of it out. Like
Oh
my
yeah,
mom will bring stuff up to me that happened in middle school and I will have zero recollection of it happening, and she's thinking of how I was devastated on the floor and I can't
yeah,
even remember it. Oh my
hmm
goodness.
yeah.
That's
That's me.
amazing.
That's me, but with high school. So we have the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what where did you go to middle school?
I went to middle school back home on Long Island too.
Long
Yeah.
Island. Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
I'm like, wait a minute. What school do I need to contact to like how do we recreate this program throughout, everywhere?
Yeah. I wonder if they're still doing it.
I'll find out.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
determined now.
Mhm.
Um so we've mentioned I think a bunch, but are there any common or maybe less common misconceptions or stigmas that we haven't mentioned around therapy
Hmm.
or mental health in general?
Mhm. Well, I guess this ties to what we've been talking about. One of the common stigmas still, even though mental health is being talked about so much more, and people are embracing therapy as a form of self-care, I think still among, like you were saying, some generations, some cultures, some genders, um, therapy is still looked at as something that if you go, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
And
It's
we
a
have to remember
weakness.
it's a weakness. Yeah. And we have to remember like there's something quote unquote wrong with all of us.
Mm.
None of us are normal. All of us can benefit from therapy because of all of those relatable reasons I was just saying before. Um, so as far as we've come, I think we still have a long way to go when it comes to breaking that stigma.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, but hopefully, more people will have conversations like this. And I definitely think, I don't know if you work with any adolescents or teenagers, but I think the Gen Zers are really, really leading the charge on changing these conversations. It's really one of the few things I will say I appreciate about that generation so far is that they're
Yeah.
very open about their mental health.
I love them for that. And I am a middle part convert now. I've gone from my side part to my middle part, and I'm loving it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I have not. I mean, I don't even know. I don't even do my hair anymore, but that's so funny you say that. I'm pretty chuggy, as they would say. Like every video I see about someone being chuggy, I'm like, yep, yep, that's me.
Yeah. Well, see, my cousins are Gen Z, and I asked them, "Do you know what shugi means?" And they said they don't. So
Oh, so you're
I
good
guess
to
some are
go.
using it, some aren't. I think it's such a strange word to like say
It's a
and hear.
horrible word.
Like,
It's a horrible
yeah,
word. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, what advice would you give to someone who's listening and who's never been to therapy and they're considering looking into it, just starting out? What are some tips or advice you would give that person?
Yes. Okay. I love this question. For all of those listening who have never been to therapy before, I have some solid advice for you. So, first, I would say go ahead and do some research. Find a couple of therapists that you want to do a phone consultation for, or some are offering video consultations now. And they're usually free. It's a great way of getting to know a therapist's personality before you commit to working together. And
Mm.
that word commit, right? That's a little bit scary because it feels like you're committing to this relationship and you're going to be opening up and bearing your soul and you're going to be so vulnerable and they're going to make you cry. No, no. So find a couple of therapists, do your free consultations, narrow it down to one that you want to commit to start to working with, and then, just treat it as trial and error and communicate with your therapist because if they're a good one, they're going to be receptive to hearing feedback like, that coping skill wasn't that helpful for me. Like, could we try and find something more in this direction?
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know. I guess that was a lot right there, but that's what I would definitely say. I would also say um, for people looking for therapists, I hear a lot of people who get so frustrated because they call their insurance companies and their insurance companies give them a list of all these therapists who are either full or outdated. They're not even in
Mm.
practice anymore. I see people, trying to do Google searches, but then they're finding therapists who aren't accepting new clients either. So, one of the best resources that I recommend to people looking for a therapist, this is how I found my therapist as well, is a website called Psychology Today. You just type in your zip code and you can narrow down your therapist by if you would prefer male, female, non binary. If you would prefer someone who takes your insurance, you can narrow it down by what you want them to specialize in. If you want them to have any kind of like religious background, there's just you can filter your results to find some really good options,
Mm.
and they'll tell you right there if they're accepting new clients or not. So yeah.
That's a really great resource. it's actually, I think, how I came across you initially.
Oh, wonderful. I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
That's funny. And then as far as, these consultations, would you say that it's kind of just a vibe that you get with a person, or are there specific things that you would say someone should be looking for in their therapist to connect with or on or about? I mean, I guess I don't have experience with this only because I called my therapist, we clicked, and it was done. I didn't have to do, much more than that. And it just happened to work out. But I know most people I talk to actually say the first person I went to just wasn't a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think makes a good fit? I guess is really what I'm saying. And how would someone maybe feel that out on a phone call?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that people can be really nervous for these initial phone calls, and that might cause them to just dive in without thinking about it and get it over with. I
Mm,
also think that people can be really desperate by the time they're making these phone calls. So they're just
mm,
trying to get into therapy as soon as possible, and they don't necessarily screen the therapist to make sure you're going to be a good fit. And that's why I would say, like, start sooner rather than later. That way you can think of some really good questions and you can screen them to make sure that they're a good fit. And some of the questions that clients have asked me that I thought are awesome questions to ask a therapist are like, what is your approach to therapy? Um, what kind of issues do you treat?
mm,
Um, do you expect me to do any work outside of therapy? How often should we be meeting?
mm-hmm,
Um, I think those are some of the ones that I've really liked. Because the biggest difference that clients tell me that they see in me versus maybe some therapists that they've worked with before, and this is why what is your approach to therapy is such an important question, is because there are definitely some clients out there who would like a therapist who's just going to sit and let them vent and let them get everything off their chest and they're going to feel better. But there are some clients who expect the therapist to engage with them in the therapy session, and they want resources and they want you to point out videos or give them worksheets. And
mm,
so I think determining whether the therapist is going to be a little bit more passive or active is one of the biggest factors to figure out, because people have strong preferences and what they would rather have in their therapist.
yeah, yeah, I agree with that as well. I mean, like I said, I just luckily clicked with mine immediately, pretty much. But now in hindsight, I will say it did for the first couple of months feel like, what are we doing? And only because if she listens to this, I mean to say that it was just me talking, and I was, I had so much to get off my chest that I didn't even realize that her subtle, pretty much questions that would come back to me, I didn't even realize the effect that those questions were having on me until many months later.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
really quite something. It's really
yeah.
like, oh, there was a point to that, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where we like to say that like therapy is kind of like this seed, it's so cheesy, so corny and everything, but therapy is like a seed that you plant and you don't see the results until months later.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about why you've chosen this profession, why you became a therapist.
Yeah, well, so similar to that seed metaphor. uh, so it took me a while to learn the skills that were planted back in high school therapy. And I first started therapy because in high school, I was a mess. I was all over the place. Um, Anxiety was really bad because bullying was really bad. I think that the hormones had like a huge effect on my mental health,
Mm-hmm.
which a lot of people still don't talk about. Um, I was having like, because of the anxiety, because of the bullying, like having some issues with like drug use and everything. So I was not in a good place at all.
Mm-hmm.
And um, someone had told my school counselor that they had seen some cuts on my wrist.
Mm-hmm.
And she got me out of class and she said, I want you to talk to this therapist that we have here in school. And so I started talking to Mr. Ferrandino. He will always have such a special place in my heart.
Oh.
Keep in touch with him to this day. He's gone from like therapist to mentor, and I'm so glad that he was in my life when he was. Started talking to him, and he just had the most laid back approach. Like, he wasn't some adult that was there to patronize me and, embarrass me or make me feel like I was a bad kid. He just was there to listen. And so, went on to college, didn't really know what I wanted to do. And a girl in my sorority was majoring at Penn State in something called resources and human development. I was like, okay, well, that kind of sounds cool. I want to help people. And from there, I just decided to make it more specific and become a therapist. And I'm very glad that I did.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think a lot of people can relate to having issues in middle school, high school, but I think that's so wonderful that you found a counselor. Well, that counselor found you really, and that it
Mm-hmm.
benefited you. I mean, I've had a couple of conversations recently with some therapists who work specifically with children and teens, and it's a problem. It's a problem that maybe there's only one counselor for 500 kids, or if someone hadn't seen cuts on your wrist, would you be sitting here now doing what you do, having this conversation? I mean, there's so much attention that needs to be put towards, I think, this real issue of not, like you said, getting therapy involved in someone's life at a much younger age. Or you also said not getting to the point where you're in that desperate place.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that therapy with teens is so delicate too, because you need a therapist like Mr. Ferrandino, because there are a lot of therapists out there who can be like patronizing or can have the attitude of like, well, you'll grow out of it or
Mm,
it'll get better. And it's like you can't say that to a teenager. They can't hear that. They don't know that it's going to get better. Um, and then part of the problem too is that, well, so I think that the reason that that happens, this whole it gets better, which it does, but you can't say that to a teen because they don't really realize it. So when they're having a breakup, or when they're being bullied, or when they just failed an exam or something like that, a lot of adults are so quick to say, "Oh, please, that's just a high school relationship. Like that wasn't going to last anyway." Or they're so quick to minimize, and I think that that's because, like us, a lot of adults don't remember what it was like to be that age because they've blocked it out, because it was really tough and it was really traumatizing. And in order for adults to better support teenagers, they need to remain in contact with that part of themselves so that they can empathize with them.
oof. That
Yeah.
sounds, oh, it sounds muddy. It sounds
Yeah.
like I gotta crack open some books, and on my own books, I mean my journals and yearbooks, and really, because I had an experience even yesterday. My daughter, we were outside at this concert, and there were these kids running around. They were a little bit older than she was, and she's only 3.5, so her awareness is not anything really to speak of, but she didn't realize that what she thought was playing was these kids actually making a game out of running from her. And she was just running with them, and she was happy as a clam. Like, she had no idea. But I'm standing there like, oh my God, they're running from my baby. They're running from my baby. And I had to take a minute, and it was reminding me of what you said, just having to put yourself back in those shoes and see it from their eyes and really try to be in that with them. And what she was in was, this is great. So I was like, okay, this is great.
Yeah.
I can't see this as, what are they doing to my baby? I have to see it as, she's having fun. Okay. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And I guess, kind of to your point, this is a little bit different, but what you said made me think of it. Like, another big issue that comes up with teenagers and their parents, and parents trying to get their kids help, is that some parents can have this approach as, you're going to therapy, and it's like a punishment. Or
Ah.
like they bring them to therapy and it's like, here's my kid, fix them. That's
Mm.
actually what my parents did to me in high school. So Mr. Ferrandino, he was there to listen, he was so supportive. I had a little panic freak out moment where I was like, I don't want to go away to college. I'm just going to stay here. I'm going to go to community college, which is totally fine. But that I had already, committed to Penn State and everything. My parents were like, what the heck? What's going on with you? Why are you suddenly changing your decision?
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Ferrandino was like, just let her sort it out. Like, it's cool. Don't force her to do anything. Like, he was very chill about it. They didn't like that. So they brought me to a new therapist and they were like,
Wow.
here, she decided she doesn't want to go to Penn State anymore. Fix her. And that was terrible. I think I did 2 sessions with that person and no.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man. Oh, that is tough. Also, as we were talking, it reminded me of new parenthood when everything is chaotic and you're exhausted, and all anyone can seem to say to you is, it'll get better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, hearing you talk too about transitions, I mean, for me personally, I don't know if there is a larger transition to speak of than transitioning into parenthood. I mean, what do you work with clients who are in that situation, and do you have any advice for them?
So I actually don't have a lot of clients who are new parents right now. I mean, which is interesting because I do majority of the time work with clients in their 20s and 30s. So,
Mm-hmm.
that is when people are having kids. But for some reason, I don't have a lot of clients who have kids of their own. I do have a lot of friends right now, though, who have started to have kids.
Mm.
I think at this point, I have 5 friends who all have at least one baby right now. And yes, I mean, you said it because you actually are a mom, but like I can absolutely agree from watching my friends that becoming a parent is the biggest life change that anyone will ever go through.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we also, it's also reminding me too, we spoke about this off air last time, that, you know, right now, I think parents, not parents, like we're all in transition of, this is being recorded July 2021. We're, kind of coming out of this pandemic, this quarantine, hopefully, right? Knock on wood.
Oh gosh,
Um,
yeah.
I think there's a lot of anxiety about going back to work, going back to school. I mean, what do you say to someone who's like absolutely losing their mind about potentially going back to the office after a year and a half, 2 years of working from home every day?
Yeah, go to therapy.
Yeah.
Go to therapy. It will help with the transition. You and your therapist can talk about your feelings towards the transition. You and your therapist can strategize how to ease back into it. You and your therapist can talk about how to talk with your employer about, maybe what that transition can look like. If need be, you and your therapist can talk about accommodations that you might need because of your mental health with your employer.
Mm.
So yeah, start therapy.
Start therapy. What do you think about some of these resources that have seem to have come about or have just gained popularity throughout this last year, of the virtual online therapy? BetterHelp is coming to mind. I know there are a few others. I've heard some mixed reviews. Do you have any opinion on resources like that?
Yeah, I don't want to bias anyone against them. So I'll just preface it with that, and
Mm-hmm.
people can take what I say with a grain of salt. Um, I'm not a huge fan of them. I think that I don't know. I don't think this is exactly what you're talking to, but I'll speak to this as well. I think that there are a lot of people who are using like Instagram and TikTok as therapy
Yeah.
because there are a lot of wonderful therapists on there who are giving really great coping skills.
Mm-hmm.
But you just have to remember that while those are wonderful resources, and sometimes I even share those videos with my clients as resources, you need to be working with the therapist as well so that therapy is tailored to you, and that so that you have a support person that you can contact
Mm-hmm.
if things get out of hand, because you can't reach out to those therapists on TikTok and on
Right.
Instagram. But to your point about like apps and virtual therapy, I mean, for a period of time, all therapy was virtual because it had to be.
Right.
But now with these apps, I mean, on the one hand, I think it's really great that people can reach a therapist, whenever they need to. Um, but on the other hand, I just don't know enough about it. I'm a little bit skeptical. I do know that when they've reached out to me about working for them, like for say like Better Health, the pay rate is not great. You're expected to see an awful lot of clients. And from my experience, like working with agencies, working at agencies when the pay isn't great and you're expected to see an awful lot of clients, you're burnt out and it's really hard to provide your best care. So I just kind of question whether people are getting their best care if those are the expectations that the therapists who work for them are being placed with.
That's a really good perspective because, I mean, when you think about it solely from the perspective of, it's that or nothing, right? Or because a lot of times this is not my experience and I'm grateful for this, but I'm able to go to therapy and my insurance covers it. I have a copay and that's it. But I know that's not the case for many people. So on one hand, you want to say, great, we started this conversation by saying everyone should go to therapy. So it's kind of like, yeah, if that is the avenue that best suits your schedule, suits your budget, excellent. But perhaps just make sure you are advocating for yourself and doing kind of your own research and homework and really getting to know your therapist to know that you're getting proper attention, proper care. I think that ultimately what I hear you saying is that if that is the avenue you're going to go down, you kind of have to be monitoring your progress on your own too, maybe just to, I don't know. Now I'm just probably speaking out of turn, but I think that that's what I would do if I was in those shoes,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's helpful to hear. And I think like to kind of summarize like what I'm trying to say, and I think what you're getting from like what I'm saying is that, and this really should be applied to all therapy, like just don't settle. Sometimes like I'm in private practice and I know that not everyone can afford to see a therapist in private practice. Um, some therapists in private practice have sliding scales. I certainly do because I want to make therapy more affordable for people who are a really good fit because having a good fit with your therapist is so important.
What does that mean? Sliding.
A
I don't
good
know what that means.
Oh, sure. So sliding scale means that you might have your set fee that you charge, but you're willing to meet with clients at a reduced fee if they're a good fit or if they seem motivated
I
or,
see.
committed.
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
wonderful.
So there's private practice where, you often pay out of pocket. Sometimes your insurance can reimburse you through your out of network benefits, and your therapist can talk with you about that. And actually, if it's okay with you, like I think it's great that we're having this conversation because a big barrier for people when it comes to therapy can be like, well, I don't know how I'm going to afford that. So if we can talk a little bit
Sure.
about
Sure.
all the different types of therapy and how to make it more affordable. So private practice, if the therapist is out of network, sometimes they might have a sliding scale and they can give you a reduced rate. Sometimes they can give you paperwork that you can submit to your insurance company to get reimbursed from them through your out of network benefits. They can talk with you more about that because that's a whole tangent. There's finding a therapist who accepts your insurance like you did, and then you have a copay, which for some people can still be really high. For some people, they have a $0 copay, so therapy is free. There's also, like you were mentioning, like some of the virtual options, and there's also a program called Open Path, and there might be more like it. Again, I can't speak to the quality of the therapy. I mean, I was on it for a little bit, but Open Path is a program, or I don't know if I would call it a program, but Open Path allows people to access therapy at a reduced rate. All of the therapists who have signed up for Open Path are committing to charge clients no more than $60 per session, but between $30 and $60 per session for therapy. So
interesting.
It's another option.
Is that available nationwide? Do you know?
I think you would have to double check
Okay.
on that. I think so, but
Okay. I can look into it and put it in the show notes regardless, because if it's offered to everyone, great. And if it's for folks in particular states, then great for them. So
yeah.
I'll look into that. That's a really great resource. Thank you for bringing that up. All of that being said, and you mentioned earlier that you see a therapist still.
Hmm.
correct? Yeah. And what are you, maybe in your personal experience or even with your clients, like, what are some of the top or most common benefits, takeaways, results that someone can look forward to with when working with a therapist?
Ooh, I love this question because I think for any new listeners, maybe this will give you a little kick in the butt and get some
Yes.
motivation to go to
Mm-hmm.
therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the benefits that you can expect if you go to therapy and you actually work on yourself, because there's a difference between going to therapy and going to therapy plus working on yourself.
Mm.
You'll have increased emotional intelligence, better relationships, better communication skills, better distress tolerance skills, which is basically like the ability to tolerate discomfort, the ability to have a bad day and not let it completely ruin your day. Um, Possibly like more assertiveness if that's what you're working on. You'll be able to advocate for yourself better. You'll be able to self-soothe and cope with your anxiety or depression or whatever it is you're going for. If you're working on your self-esteem, you're going to have an increase in self-esteem. So there's a lot of benefits.
And you, in your responses to some of my questions, you mentioned self esteem quite a bit. And I made a note to bring that up because I think certainly as adults, I don't know why, maybe this is my just perspective on it. I think we learn, quote unquote, so much about self esteem when we're young. And it has become almost this sort of just, I don't know, maybe like you're saying earlier, it's like we don't take it seriously, I think, and I think that as adults, we don't realize how many potential of our potential issues that we're experiencing actually come from our own lack of self esteem.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I'm really glad that you're bringing this up because whenever I'm doing those initial phone consultations and people are telling me, yeah, I have anxiety, I have depression, I always ask them, so do you think you have low self esteem too? And 100%, they're always like, yes. And I think that you could see how low self esteem would lead to anxiety because if you don't think that you're attractive or you don't think that you're good enough or you don't think you're smart enough, then you're always going to be anxious about being more attractive or being good enough or being smart enough or do people think that you're good enough,
Mm.
and then it's going to contribute to depression because you have all these reasons to hate yourself and beat yourself up. So I definitely think that self-esteem is the root of everything, and I do think that it's talked about so often in a very surface level way that it
Yes.
gets very overplayed, and now at this point it's just like what is that called, like
Yeah. Mm.
it's just like a flashy word that
Yeah.
people throw out to
Yes.
sound like
Yes.
woke or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. Who am I? Gen Z using this word? Does Gen Z even use the word woke? um,
I,
but
yeah, go
yeah.
ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead
Well,
and finish.
and similarly to how like self care has kind of gotten thrown lumped in there too.
Totally. That's exactly what I was going to say. You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say that, unfortunately, I think that's self care. And I think we are bordering on a timeline where even words like boundaries,
Mm-mm.
triggers, in my experience, and maybe it's just because I'm immersed in this world on all of my social media platforms. I follow all therapists, I follow all people who talk about it all day. And so maybe it's just my experience with it. But certainly self care, I think we can all agree, is getting just thrown through the ringer as far
Mm-hmm.
as what it actually means, who it's for, and why we need it.
Yeah.
But I worry that some of the other words are getting played out. Is really what we're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
How do you self care now that we're talking about it?
Oh gosh, me and my therapist were just having this conversation today about how I need more self care. Um, Well, I think again, the reason that it's getting overplayed, all of these words are getting overplayed, is because people are throwing them out and talking about them in a very surface level way without personalizing it as well. What does this mean to me? Because it's very easy to be like, oh yeah, totally need to do more self care. Like I'm so burnt out, I'm so anxious, like really
Mhm.
tough week. It's like, okay, but stop using that vague word and tell me what are you gonna do? What do you need to do more of to like fill your gas tank back up? And so for me, it's time with my dogs as long as they're behaving. It's totally time outside. I love the outdoors. I've recently started gardening, and that's how I know I'm getting old because it's like an old lady hobby. Um, but I love arts and crafts. I love doing like DIY projects around my house. So creative stuff is
Mhm.
is a big part of my self-care.
How do you make sure you make the time for it? Do you have any strategies for really getting it done?
Um, I feel like a bit of a hypocrite because I'm talking a good talk right now, but whether or not I
Hmm.
actually practice it, but that's good for people to know too who are listening that like your therapists are human too, and we're not always the best at coping skills or communication or self care either. But um, a coping skill that I like for making sure you practice self care. Someone on Instagram posted this wonderful graphic and it was called a self care menu, and they broke it down just like a menu at a restaurant into things you can do that would take 5 minutes, things that you could do
Ah.
that would take 15 minutes, things that you could do that would take half an hour. And you can break it down into whatever increments you want. But same thing like with the food menu, the appetizers, the cheap stuff is at the top. And then maybe you have your sandwiches, a little bit pricier. And then you have your like steak and seafood dinners that are the most
I love that.
expensive. And so I think that, again, in order to make self care not a surface level conversation anymore, we need to name what we're going to be doing and we need to see in our schedule when we're going to have time for what we're going to be doing. So if
Mm.
someone were to make that self care menu and hang it up by their desk and they were having a really stressful day at work, they could be like, well, I could take 5 minutes right now. What are my 5 minute self care items? Okay, I could do some deep breathing. I could go for a walk around the parking lot. I could watch a YouTube video of puppies playing. Like,
Yeah,
so
whatever makes you smile for a minute, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's so true though, because I think when you actually break down time, you can accomplish so much in such a little bit of time. And I'm thinking of an example of, sometimes I go downstairs and my first floor is just so overwhelming. The kids have thrown toys everywhere, the sink, the this, the that, and it looks so overwhelming. And I'm now, to use your example, you're sitting at your desk, you're so overwhelmed, you're back to back meetings, whatever it is. And I will now put on a song and know that it's 3.5, 4 minutes long and say, I'm only going to clean for this one song. And it's amazing. I almost always get everything cleaned up or enough so that I can breathe, right?
Oh my gosh, I love that. I'm going to start sharing that with my clients.
And I think what it's taught me, actually, Erica at the Mom Break, I will link her in the show notes. I learned that from her, but I think what it really showed me is how much you can accomplish in such a short period of time, and you don't even realize how quickly the time has gone by. Or if, you and I sat down at 7:45. Between 7:40 and 7:45, I went to the bathroom, got water, checked on my daughter one more time, handed the monitor off to my husband. And if you list them out, it sounds like a lot, but I did it in 5 minutes,
Hmm.
and I think we underestimate how much even just a few minutes can alleviate stress, alleviate anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I used to suggest a version of that coping skill, but I'm now going to suggest this one that you just mentioned because what I used to suggest is that if people were feeling overwhelmed, like you said, if you walk into your house and it's very messy and you're overwhelmed and you just shut down, you go in your room, you flop on the bed, and then you start like with the self-loathing because you're like, I'm
Yes.
so lazy,
I
I'm not
should
doing
do this.
anything.
I should
The
do
sh-
that. The shoulds, right?
yes, the should statements. I can tell you're in therapy. The should statements. Yes. Um, and so what I used to suggest is like, well, just figure out how long do you think you could tolerate doing something like that? You think like maybe like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Okay, set a timer
Yeah.
for that amount. And when the timer goes off, stop what you're doing. But I like this one with music better because music makes everything more fun.
Yeah, and it's funny. I started with a timer because I got a timer for my kids, and when the timer went off, the screen went off, and that was working very well for a little while. But and I started with myself with everything. I'm like, okay, you know what? You have to do dishes. You don't want to do it, but do it for 5 minutes, and I would time it. And then I saw that Erica added music to it, and I was like, okay, this is better yet.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Erica. That was a great
Yeah,
idea.
it's really good. She has a lot of good tips for efficiency and sort
Mm.
of getting through your day. And she actually has a lot of videos too about she will film herself cleaning a room or tidying a room or whatever, and you see it in like 2.5 speed or whatever, and it looks like it's taking her a long time, and at the end she'll be like, this was 4 minutes of effort, and it's really, it kind of smacks you in the face. You're like, the build up is worse than the actual the doing. And that's, I guess now that I say it, that's probably true for a lot of things that I talk about in therapy.
Oh, absolutely. There was this research study, and I share this with a lot of clients. Maybe I can find it for you and send it to you. There was this research study that ended up showing that 97% of the time that we were worrying, we have nothing to worry about. And they broke it down. The reason they said that is they broke it down into different categories, and they said, this percentage of the time, the thing that you're worried about doesn't actually happen. This percentage of the time, it does happen, but it's not as bad as you thought it was going to be, which is what we're talking about. And this percentage of the time, it does happen. It is as bad as you thought it was going to be, but it taught you a valuable lesson. You were able to make meaning out of it. And so 97%, that's, oh my gosh. Yeah.
It's everything right there. I mean, it's most of my day. It's like, and I mean that to say that most of my day is spent trying to tell myself that exact percentage. It's really not going to be that bad.
Yeah. And is it okay if so something that I think kind of connects to is something we were talking about in the beginning, and something related to self-esteem, which we kind of, skirted over to go to self-care. I kind of want to put it out there for people listening that our brains work against us so much of the time because of the way that they're designed to. And our brains are designed to get us to think about things that could go wrong, right? When we were, cave people, you had to worry about the saber-toothed tiger or lion or whatever those animals were that we luckily don't have to deal with anymore.
Right? Survival.
We had to worry about survival. And so it was like, I could encounter, I could encounter this animal. Let me bring my spear. And in this day and age, it's like, it could rain out. Let me bring my umbrella.
Oh my God.
Now it's like, but now it's just gotten so snowballed where it's like, this person might not like me. I don't know. We can think about the problems and we don't kick it into the solution gear like we used to. Or when it comes to the self-esteem piece of things, it's almost like at this point, we're so gaslit because we have all of these people telling us, increase your self-esteem. You can do it. You can like yourself. You have all these people on social media who are maybe saying that they love themselves and accept themselves. And that's great. And I hope that they genuinely do. But our brains are not designed to like ourselves. Our brains are wired to seek acceptance. And in order to seek acceptance, we need to be constantly assessing what's wrong with me, what might people not like, so that I can change that about myself, so that I can be accepted. Because that goes back to when we were cave people too. We needed to be accepted in order to function together, hunt and gather, and raise our children together, and do our laundry together, or whatever cave people were doing. And so I say all of that to reinforce again why everyone needs to be in therapy. It's because your brain is designed to work against you and to cause these issues like low self-esteem and anxiety. And unless you're in therapy and actively working to change your default setting, you are going to end up with these issues we've been talking about.
That's so powerful. I'm so glad you took the time to go back to that, because that's everything. I mean, that's why you're saying, why I'm saying without any education to back it up, that there's nothing wrong with you. Your brain, like you said, is functioning the way it's supposed to. It's meant to protect you and survive. And we just, like you said, live in a time where things are different. We don't need to, I was going to say we don't need, like the pack herd mentality, but we kind of do. We just need it differently. Yeah. Connection's a big one too. I think in so many ways we are ultra connected, but we also lack connection in person, face-to-face ways. And I'm mainly speaking about myself because I just resist it now, especially after this last year. But I'm really I'm really coming around to the fact that I need to get back in the presence of others on a more regular basis.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I was literally just talking about this with my therapist today about how I've always been an introvert. I definitely need my alone time. But now to get me to go out and see my friends, it's like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
And these are my friends we're talking
Yeah.
about. These are people I actually like. So it sounds
Yeah.
like you can relate.
Yeah. And I did want to make sure I go back. I made a note before, I don't even know how long ago, but it's a big one for me, is that you mentioned that most people don't realize how closely connected your mental health and your hormones are. Can
Mhm.
you talk a little bit about that and what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's becoming more talked about, and this isn't, it's still not even talked about a lot, but with postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, people are starting to talk more about that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Still not talking about it as much as it needs to be talked about, but they're starting to talk more about it, and people are normalizing it, and they're saying, I'm acting this way. I have this anxiety that I never had before. I have this depression that's way worse than it's ever been because of my hormones. And it's like, well, yeah, of course, because you just had a baby and everyone knows that your hormones are out of whack. And I recently learned that when you're breastfeeding, your hormones are still out of whack.
Mm-hmm.
So that was interesting to learn about. But we have to remember that there are other times where your hormones are changing and where your hormones can affect your mental health. I mean, people also talk about it when it comes to menopause, and they talk about it in a really callous and unhelpful way. You know, women are known for being crazy when they're
Right.
going through menopause. That's not helpful.
No, no,
Um,
it's not.
and I think that that same language is used around PMS.
Yeah.
But I can speak to, so my hormonal mental health issues were because of PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And I think people are very quick to minimize
Mm-hmm.
PMS, mood swings that happen before you start your period. PMDD is a whole nother level in that it was crippling anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
It was suicidal thoughts. It
Oh,
was thoughts of, I should just drive off the road right now.
oh
Like
my God.
totally irrational.
Yeah.
Irrational to the point that every month, the week before I was going to get my period, I genuinely thought that I did not love my boyfriend at the time anymore, and I would break up with him every month on the dot
Oh my
the week
God.
before I would get my period. And so, luckily, I started a birth control pill that is designed to mitigate the effects of PMDD, and I don't have symptoms from it anymore.
That's great.
There are other options for that as well. People can take antidepressants to manage PMDD, but here's another example of how hormones can affect your mental health really severely.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up and ask you about that because I definitely experienced this as well. I know, and I last time my last therapy session we talked about this. We both agreed that I genuinely experienced postpartum depression, anxiety especially because my son was born February before lockdown, so it was just the perfect storm of everything. But for the last several months, it's so funny how you really get to know your body and you really, really get in tune with yourself because I could actually differentiate any depression or anxiety that I was feeling as part of postpartum sort of really dissipate. And then, like clockwork, 10 days before my period, I was a disaster. I just, all I wanted to do was get in bed. I was doing the bare minimum of taking care of my kids. I mean, they were cared for, but it was like, here's the TV again. Here's the peanut butter and jelly again. I'm ordering dinner every night. Like, I would call my husband starting at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. When are you coming home? When are you coming home? Because I just had no patience.
Yeah.
Things that would normally make me feel better, things that would normally make me happy, I had no interest in.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a friend who I'm going to be interviewing soon actually tell me about PMDD. And she talked about her experience, and I will let her tell it. But a lot of what she was saying just really felt aligned. And similar to what you were saying, I spoke to my psychiatrist. We up my meds, and this is the first month now that I've been with an increased dosage, and it helped. It helped.
Yeah.
It really did. It kind of messed with my cycle a little bit. It was a little bit late, but at no point in the last month did I feel like my only option was to get in bed and not come out. It's really, it's so remarkable that women who don't see therapists and don't take medication and don't have a psychiatrist and don't have support systems go through this and go to work, take care of kids. I mean, I just always think of those women that don't even know that they have something that they can do something about. They just think, like you said, it's PMS. Yeah. No one talks about it.
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. My heart just like kind of feels a little like, I don't know, my heart feels sad for them because it just feels like for you to paint that picture, that seems like a very lonely person.
Yeah. And I start to wonder, what do we do about it? Right? Like, I don't know. This is like the big philosophical question that I have constantly for myself and for the people I'm talking to. It's like, how do we change the world? How do we do this better for everyone? Because enough. It's enough. It's 2021. Enough,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a big part of it, like we were talking about, is ending the stigma by exposing people to therapy and what it actually is. A big part of it, and we did touch on this, but I think that, it needs to be talked about more, not necessarily right now, but like a big part of it is making therapy financially available to anyone who wants it. And there are some things that you can do on your own, like journaling, that can definitely help you get some feelings out when you're in a tough place. So,
yeah. And then it might be a place where you might seek out some of those therapists who are on Instagram, on TikTok, who are creating good content that might just give you, I see them also as a place to just get your wheels spinning. They tend to be, some of them are so in depth, and others are more just, I never thought about it that way before. And that's sometimes enough, because using the picture that I painted, someone on Instagram might be posting about PMDD, and you might be reading the symptoms going, that's me. Oh, maybe I need a therapist, So, yeah. Is there anything that surprises you about what you do?
No. Well, okay. So I guess what surprises me is that clients think that they're going to say something that's going to surprise me.
That's good.
Yeah. So, I'll have clients who, like, I am so grateful that we have the type of relationship where they feel connected to me and able to trust me and know that they can speak honestly without being judged. And sometimes they'll preface things that they're going to say with like, I feel so bad. I feel so embarrassed to say this to you, or, I feel so disgusting for saying this, or I have a lot of guilt about sharing this with you, or a lot of shame, all those awful, awful emotions. And they say it, and I'm like, okay, so like, let's talk about it. Like, and so yeah, the thing that surprises me is that people still think that I can be surprised at this point. And it's not because I've heard it all. It's just because no matter what you tell me, I see all of the beautiful, wonderful, amazing parts of you. And there's nothing that you could say to me that would see you as anything less than beautiful and wonderful.
Oh, I just got to chill. Oh, that's so nice to hear. I mean, because I think at the end of the day, it probably just has a lot to do with, we just want to be liked, even if it's by our therapist, we just want to, I've definitely prefaced some things like that to my therapist, and she's literally, I can see her like holding back, like, are you kidding me? That's not that bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I'm like, but I say to her all the time, I'm like, you don't know this, and I know it's not really real, but we're friends. I mean, we're friends, so I have to sometimes preface what I say to you because you might not like me after. And she's like, that's absolutely not how this works.
So it's so funny. Oh my gosh, you guys sound like you have a great relationship.
Yeah, she's a good one for me. You know, we
Mhm.
just we seem to have a nice rhythm going. But Shaylin, is there anything that you would have asked yourself or wanted to bring up and make sure we talk about before that I didn't?
Well, I've been thinking throughout this whole thing in the back of my mind, and this is my anxiety and this is my self-esteem voice of like, you know, when this episode airs, you're probably going to listen to it, and you're probably going to have some things that you wish you would have said differently, or that
Mm,
you wish you would have added. And I'm sure that I will.
mm-hmm.
Maybe I can come back one time and
Yes,
add more or something
yeah,
like that.
definitely.
Um, so let me think here if there's anything that I want to add. I think the biggest thing that I just want to reinforce is don't settle. If you have a therapist and it's not feeling like a good fit, I know it takes a lot of effort and energy, especially if you don't have much to start with, but find yourself a therapist who feels like a good fit. Because I remember in grad school doing some research on what makes therapy effective.
Hmm.
And the defining factor for whether or not your therapy is going to be effective is the therapeutic alliance. And the therapeutic alliance is the relationship that you have with your therapist.
Mm,
So if you're settling, you're 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 putting a ceiling on the progress that you can make.
interesting.
And
Yeah,
that's not, I mean, this is a big investment of
right.
your time, sometimes of your money. So make sure you're getting what you deserve.
Right. If you're gonna put in all of the time, the effort, and you know what? I don't know that we've said this, and I think now that you're saying it, it's worth saying too. If you're actually gonna, put yourself through it, so to speak, like a lot of times it gets worse before it gets better, or something comes up that you don't expect. I mean, that's happened to me plenty of times where we get down a rabbit hole and all of a sudden something has been opened up in me that I didn't even realize was so pushed down. And it feels at first sometimes like, oh, why did we have to go there? But then, it always shows its reasons and plays out, and I'm always better off at the end of it. But if you're gonna, like I said, kind of, I just sound so negative about it because it's really not. It's really a beautiful thing. But if you're gonna put yourself through it, make it worth it. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's a good point.
Yeah. Oh boy. I feel like I could say so much more, but you'll definitely have to come back, and maybe when your episode airs we do like an Instagram live or something, and you sort of fill in any gaps that you that you hear in your episode that you want to fill in. So, that being said,
Yeah.
Shaylin, where can people find you and connect with you if they would like to?
So people can find me on Instagram. I am no longer super active, but I do have some good posts on there from
You
when I
do.
was.
Yeah.
It's therapy.with.shaylin, and my name is spelled Shaylyn.
Excellent. And if you wouldn't mind, I will put in the show notes as well, but I think your website is really thorough as well, and I think it gives a really relatable and low pressure kind of way of explaining what it is that you do. And even if someone's not in Pennsylvania and can't work with you, I think it's a good starting point to just understanding the type of work that you and your colleagues do. So, if you know it offhand, you can say it now. Otherwise, I'll make sure to put it in the show notes for people.
Yeah, so I just looked it up so I wouldn't mess it up. My website is mytherapistShaylin.com.
There you go. All right. Well,
Yep.
Shaylin, thank you so much. This was so great. I think we shared a lot of really great information for people today.
Yes, you're welcome. I hope those of you listening found it helpful, and that you realize that you are normal. There's nothing wrong with you, and there are a lot of good therapists out there who can help you make whatever improvements you're trying to make.
Okay, so how was that for an education? Yeah, I told you we covered a lot. So I'm grateful to Shaylin for taking the time to really break down therapy, especially for those of us out there who have yet to explore therapy as a resource. One of my main goals with this show is to provide that insight and share with you what therapy can be and how it can be useful for you so that hopefully we're just breaking down stigmas and fears associated with this type of help. I am a person that's interested in this, and I didn't know that therapy could be for me. I didn't think that was possible. So that's my whole thing here. It's possible if you want it. The other thing that's sticking out to me is the issue of these kind of buzzy words and the oversaturation of mental health terminology. This weighs heavily on me because mental health, while I'm so relieved that it is having a moment, so to speak, right now, it's not a moment. It's something that we all have. We all have mental health. We always have. We always will. And we have to always take care of it. The same way that you wouldn't expect to take care of your medical health alone, you cannot expect to always take care of your mental health alone. So if you're interested in finding a therapist, as Shaylyn suggested, please visit psychologytoday.com. Or if you go to my website and click on Find a Pro, you'll find some of our experts that have been on the show and their contact information. So just a reminder, if you're looking to do that, words are hard today, and I've done this so many times, so you're just going to have to deal with it. But here's my reminder. You're not a failure. You're not weak. You are living the human experience, and it's okay to get help. So thank you, Shaylyn, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.